I was a kid, I had a very clear picture of heaven. Heaven, I figured, is an all-you-can-eat Chinese buffet. Back in the 1970s, there were only 2 types of ethnic food in my hometown in Jersey. One of those was Italian. Every Thursday night, we had pizza from Angelo's Pizzeria, and that was cool. What kid doesn't like pizza? But every so often, around dinner time, my parents would utter the magic words, Cafe Manor. And I'd start jumping up and down like kids do these days when you mention Chuck E. Cheese. Don't get me wrong, Cafe Manor was nothing special. It had none of the things I now value in a Chinese restaurant. There was no extra menu on the wall and Chinese characters. Other than the owners, no Chinese people ever ate there. It was your typical shrimp toast and poo-poo platter, one from column A, one from column B. Open on Christmas Eve, Chinese restaurants of the 1970s. But for me, Cafe Manor was the definition of exotic. It was the only place I ever got excited about vegetables. The broccoli and the chicken and broccoli was almost as good as the meat. You want to know what really got me going? What could make a little Jewish kid like me jump up and down and salivate? The pork. My God, the pork! My mother made pork chops at home, but they're usually a little dry, a little overcooked. Bits and pieces got stuck in your teeth. With pork like that, you can understand why the Old Testament prophets put the kibosh on piggy. But Cafe Manor transformed pork to a magical substance. Before I had my first spare rib, I didn't know meat could be so juicy and sweet. Then there were those little strips of pork in the wonton soup. You know the ones I'm talking about with the bits of red on either end? How'd they do that anyway? But it was the dumplings. The steamed pork dumplings. Cafe Manor made a fine dumpling. I could eat these dumplings every day for the rest of my life. When I was a kid, I figured we all go to the heaven we want. My heaven? Dumplings. 24/7. The angels pushing around carts, handing out every conceivable type of dumpling, left and right, non-stop, for all eternity. Forget about halos and harps. Nothing but chopsticks and soy sauce. Jews don't believe in heaven. But this was a heaven I could believe in. The animal psychologist Conrad Lorenz popularized the notion of imprinting. If a little chick breaks out of its shell and the first thing it sees is your face, it'll follow you around everywhere, like you're its mother. As a kid, I imprinted on Cafe Manor. Even today, I have a soft spot for cheap Chinese food, and I will follow a dumpling anywhere it goes. But until 1998, I'd never been to China. That's like being a Muslim and never going to Mecca. But in 1998, I was offered the dream job. Oh well, it came along at just the right time. You see, I was looking for an escape. The year before, I'd published my first novel. I had a great editor, respectable publisher, sold about 7,000 copies in hardcover. I thought those were good numbers. I thought I was on the verge of a new career as a novelist. I was wrong on both counts. 7,000 copies? That's not good numbers. In our age of blockbusters, my book didn't sell enough copies to go to paperback. And my publisher? Not interested in the sequel. But if you're interested in my first book, I'll sell you a copy after the show at $10, a bargain. I'll even sign it for you. But in the interest of full disclosure, I should tell you. You can go on the web. You can go to Amazon.com. You can buy a copy of my book for a single penny. You can't even buy candy these days for a penny. You can see why in 1998 I was depressed. My wife Karen urged me to focus on all the fun I had writing the book and publishing the book and doing all those book things, but I couldn't stop focusing on the might have beens. And that's when the job came along. Actually, 2 jobs. One for me, one for my wife, as the East Asia representatives of an international humanitarian organization. We're based in Tokyo, and we focus on reducing tensions between North Korea and the rest of the world. We travel around the region. We talk with activists and politicians. We organize seminars and conferences. We write reports and papers. And we eat! We eat in Japan, we eat in Korea, we eat in China. Mandu, gyoza, jiaozi, we are in dumpling heaven! Mind you, I do have some reservations about living in Japan. I figure Japan will be all the excessive consumerism of America, plus Hello Kitty and vomiting salarymen. That first afternoon, as I was having my first bowl of soba and shrimp tempura in our neighborhood stand-up noodle shop, I knew we'd made the right move. I mean, for one thing, where else in the world can you go to a ramen museum and sample 7 different regional varieties of ramen noodle soup? I'm talking the real stuff, not that instant atrocity you get at supermarkets here. I decided I will make the most of our time in Asia. I will eat with a purpose. I'll be on a quest. I'll be like Leonard Nimoy. But forget about aliens and Bigfoot and Amelia Earhart. I am in search of the perfect meal. I want to recapture that moment when I was a kid. And I bit into my first pork dumpling, and the flavor exploded in my mouth. And all over the plate, probably all over my clothes. Perfection. But why perfect? I mean, wasn't that just pretty good? I mean, I could have come back from Asia with lots of stories of pretty good meals. That would have been too much like my novel. I published a pretty good novel. I sold a pretty good number of copies. And now you can buy my book for a pretty good price. No, I'd had enough of might-have-been experiences. But the perfect meal of my childhood and the perfect meal of today's food-obsessed era are 2 different things entirely. When I was a kid, a cupcake was just a cupcake, not a reality TV show. When I was a kid, you could go to a place like Cathay Manor and delude yourself into thinking that you were getting authentic Chinese food. But something happened in the 1990s. What had been an obsession for a discriminating minority became the religion of the majority. The Food Network began in 1993. Suddenly everybody was opening up restaurants. Jose Andres, Rick Bayless, Don Shula. People were talking about food like they were dealing drugs on the corner. Good food had become an addiction in America. I mean, how many of the following adjectives had you even heard of 20 years ago? Gourmet, organic, artisanal, locally grown, free range, grass-fed, air-chilled, fair trade, shade-grown, pulp-added, super premium, antioxidant, gluten-free, stone-ground, heirloom, extra virgin! I've confessed that I'm a food addict. But what about you? I mean, presumably you're here because you have more than a passing interest in food, but are you an addict? Do you start thinking about dinner before you've even finished lunch? Do you organize your vacations restaurant by restaurant? Are you even listening to what I'm saying? Are you thinking about what you're going to eat after the show? You got an appetizer, I'm delighted. We food addicts are acutely aware of the numbers. If we live to an average age of 75, that's 82,125 meals we will eat in our lifetime. That's 82,125 chances, minus the pap weed at the beginning, the pap weed at the end, to get it absolutely, gloriously, transcendentally perfect. And if we fail, at the end of the day, and I'm talking about the real end of the day, it won't be St. Peter who'll be asking us food addicts for an accounting of our sins. There, at the door of the heavenly version of Cathay Manor, will be standing Julia Child, St. Julia, who set the culinary standard with her book, The Way to Cook. In order to get into that all-you-can-eat dim sum buffet of heaven, I will get down on my knees and make my case to St. Julia. St. Julia, I've made many mistakes in my life. I've burned the garlic dozens of times. I kind of like General Tso's chicken. But I've also spent years and years in the quest for the perfect meal. I've gone high-end, I've eaten street food, I've traveled to many exotic locations, and I have had many very good meals. I am not interested in very good, Julia will say. Did you or did you not find your perfect meal? the question that I will try to answer for you tonight. I will summon two spirit guides to help us on our journey. The first is Alexis Soyer, the great French chef of the 19th century, the Julia Child of his time. The second is my father, a child psychologist who died several years ago. All three of us, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, all three of us were embarked on our own journeys of perfection. And all three of us, I don't want to get ahead of the story, because before I could even embark on this journey, I had to convince the skeptic. I had to convince the skeptic in the family that such a journey was even worthwhile. I had to convince my wife.